Hi, it's Roz, and I think I know I've mentioned in a couple of videos already, that I was going to bite the bullet and have a go at James Joyce's Ulysses this spring, joining in a read-along led by Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics and Mark Nash, channel of that name. And it started, we're underway, and I thought I'd kind of report in on how I felt about the first part one of Ulysses. Now, Ulysses has a bit of a reputation, which is probably why I hadn't started it, read it before, and I'm someone that I quite enjoy a bit of a challenge in my reading. I don't mind working a bit to get the most out of a book, but I'm not interested in reading as some kind of chore. There's enough chores in my life, one way or another, that reading doesn't need to be one of them. So I guess one of my hesitations about Joyce was, about Ulysses in particular, was would it be a chore? So here we see me with my happy face, because no, it's not. I'm really enjoying it. Now, the lovely thing about the read-along is that we've got people in the group like Alan and Sina, who have studied the book. Alan knows it like the back of his hand, I think, and have like a depth of knowledge which is tremendous. Then we've got someone like Noah, who is really into unpicking all in a lot of detail, really gets all the ideas, is really interested in all the ideas and wants to sort of pursue those. And Mark, who's a very kind of how would you say, quite an analytical reader. He's a writer as well, and he brings that writer's eye to his reading, and so when he talks about a book, you feel that. But there's also people in the group, like me or Arlene, say, who, we're coming to this the first time, and we've both said that we're the kind of readers that we quite like to be able to just kind of get on and read it and see how we experience it for ourselves, and we don't want to be having to stop every 5 minutes to check that we're understanding what we're reading, because that would take the fun out of it. So hence, that's why I'm really happy to say that it going on the first 3 chapters, which I've read so far, part 1, it is really very readable. Why is that? One thing that I've noticed right from the start is there is a really strong seam of humour running through this book. It's not laugh out loud funny, that's not what I mean, but there's lots in it that like bring a little smile to your face, a little wry chuckle, yeah, to kind of lift you and entertain you, I suppose. In the first chapter, to give you an example or two, in the first chapter we've got like 3 characters. Stephen Dedalus, who's like he's the person that we follow for these 3 chapters, and then there's Buck Mulligan, that he's sharing this his home with at the moment, and this place that they're renting, and then and they're both Irishmen. And then we have their visitor, Haynes, who's an Englishman and a student, and he's kind of over visiting Ireland to study, I think. And Haynes is like this kind of, he's like a great, almost caricature of an Englishman, like that particular type, who's rather kind of upper class and has that kind of arrogance of the English upper classes, but he's also a bit of an intellectual, thinks he is, and thinks he's kind of like, liberal intelligentsia maybe. So he has the kind of underlying arrogance, and then on top of that he's kind of like apologizes, or has a sort of self-deprecation kind of going on. And there's this moment when he's talking to Stephen, and Stephen makes some reference to like British imperialism, and Haynes's response, and I'm going to read it to you because I really enjoyed that, was he says, I can quite understand that, he said calmly. An Irishman must think like that, I dare say. We feel in England that we've treated you rather unfairly. It seems history is to blame. Oh, brilliant. Don't you just love it? I can just picture the figure and him saying that, and like he's kind of apologizing but also being quite patronizing, and also like distancing from it from himself, like oh, history's to blame, you know. An instant just a little before that, we kind of discovered that he's been learning to speak Gaelic Irish, and the woman who delivers their milk turns up, and obviously he looks at her and he thinks, oh great, Irish peasant, I can try out my Irish on her, you know. And he does, and this old woman sort of asks her, are you speaking French? It's great. I thought that was brilliant. I loved it. So yes, there's kind of humour all the way through, and kind of pricking people's bubbles, I suppose, of pretension or arrogance. So whereas I was worried that I was gonna find Joyce's style rather pretentious, I think I don't. Lots of great dialogue. He writes good dialogue. Not plodding, you know, really kind of lively. Again, in the first chapter, like the Buck Mulligan character, kind of he when he's talking to Stephen Dedalus, he's like on one level sounds like he's being all matey, or kind of like boosting him up, but actually he's kind of needling him all the time, just giving him these little digs, like an overbearing big brother. Do you have big brothers? If you do, you'll know what I mean. If you are a big brother, sorry. Fortunately, my big brothers aren't like to be watching this, so I can get away with this. But yeah, he's always trying to just kind of get one up on Stephen. And so there's this, like one of his things is he kind of makes out that he's teasing Stephen about only washing once a month. And then I love Stephen's response. So he's sort of, making this thing about him only washing once a month, and Stephen says, all Ireland is washed by the Gulf Stream, Stephen said, as he let honey trickle over a slice of the loaf. Oh, again, love it. So we've got humour, we've got dialogue. Characters. Joyce can definitely write a character. He can create one in a very limited space of time that you feel you can hear, see, believe in. Definitely one of his skills. In the second chapter, Stephen goes to work. He's working as a school teacher, and you get the boys in the classroom and all of that. That's great. Good dialogue there again. But we meet Deasy, who's his head teacher, and Deasy as a character was I just loved, because he's really kind of pompous, and kind of quite self-important, and he's got this obsession about foot and mouth disease, and he decides he needs to write a letter to the paper to tell them, you know, he's going to single-handedly save the Irish livestock industry with his theories about how they should deal with foot and mouth disease. And he's just, yes, he was an utterly convincing character to me, I suppose. But he's not just light-hearted. There's a kind of a streak of nastiness about Deasy as well that really comes through. How he talks about women, and he's also quite anti-Semitic. So I don't know how to adequately say characters right there. Now, plot. This is not a plot-driven book on the basis of the first three chapters, which doesn't mean to say that things don't happen. You know, there is incident. Thing. You know, there's enough to kind of carry you along. It's not solely a novel of ideas. There is things. Basically, things happen. Things happen to people that you believe in, and these people talk to each other. But the other thing these people do, and Stephen Dedalus in particular, is they think, and we get taken inside their heads, or specifically inside, in these sections, inside Stephen Dedalus's head, and and that's, what you'd call stream of consciousness, which Joyce is really known for, I guess. And again, I find that really enjoyable. Stephen has a very lively mind, and like us, all of us, when he's thinking, he doesn't sort of think in a linear way. You're thinking about one thing and then something else pops into your mind and then you remember something and then that reminds you of something else and you're off on a tangent. And that's what you get in this stream of consciousness. Yeah, if you just go with it, it's a lot of fun. You have to not be frustrated by the fact that you've got these endless tangents, because actually you have to trust Joyce that together it will make something that is coherent. In chapter 3, that sort of up to that we've had like little spots of that sort of being inside someone's head, but that stream of consciousness tap is really turned on full in chapter 3. Stephen is walking along the beach, and we're very much inside his head, and there's this bit where he's thinking we might pop in on his aunt, and then he starts imagining himself visiting his aunt, and this scene with his uncle and his cousin and all of that, and being offered a drink, and by the time he stops recreating this scene in his head, he realises he's missed the turning and he's gone too far and he's not going to visit them after all. I've done things like that, I have to admit. The other thing we get in kind of in Stephen's stream of consciousness is wonderful description, and that's definitely a Joyce, a top Joyce quality. His descriptions is lovely and vivid and real and detailed and complex and enjoyable, and a lot of that is down to the fact that he is what a master of language, and it's clear, I think, that, well, I know that he went through many kind of like versions of this book as he was writing it, and he obviously really thinks about every word, and there are sentences that are crude in the sense of like rude, or or the dialogue that's kind of like quite straightforward, some of it, but a lot of the language in here is almost like poetry. You'll get like little bursts of like, I don't know, like things like alliteration and assonance that you'd expect to find in poetry that are there in this prose, and that again is definitely giving me a lot of pleasure. One of the things he does that I really like is he kind of creates portmanteau words. Puts a couple of things together to make a new word that works. So he talks about dew silky cows, and you can just imagine them in the early morning with dew on their coats, and oh yeah, that's nice. There's someone with sea cold eyes. Yeah. He's talking about waves, and it describes them as seahorses, and those seahorses are, now let me get this word right, bright wind bridled. That's it, bright wind bridled, the seahorses. Oh yeah, you just coo at that because it's lovely. So loads of pleasures there. Now, one of my worries coming to this book was that it has this reputation of being like very multi-layered and full of like ideas and references and so on, and it's true. There is no doubt that Joyce like kind of packs this in all the time. There's endless references and allusions, in every paragraph there's going to be something. Do you have to be an incredibly erudite reader to enjoy it? Well, I think not. I think you can just be carried along by all the other things that I've sort of talked about, the humour, the dialogue, the characters, the incidents, and the language, above all, the language. Having said that, I think it's probably fair to say that you will get more out of it if you get at least a proportion of the references and allusions. For example, I think it probably is helpful to come to this book with a little bit of understanding of Irish history. If you don't know that the Irish and the English have a complex history, if you don't know that at the time the book is set, probably there was like a minority in Ireland that were perhaps ultimately of English origin and Protestant faith, who thought that being ruled by England was a jolly good thing, and a majority who Catholic, probably mostly, and although not exclusively, in fact, who strongly felt that that Ireland should be independent and that British rule was basically imperialist. And it's useful to know that. It's useful to have an idea, I suppose, that Catholic Church use Latin at this point, so when it goes off into something in Latin, it may well be a little bit of a church service, and it just kind of gives you, oh right, yeah, we've kind of got some religious imagery here, even if you don't understand the Latin, so things like that are helpful. It's obvious from the name of the book, Ulysses, which is like the Latinized version of Odysseus, that there's going to be some connection between what you're reading and the Odyssey. Do you need to know the Odyssey back to front to enjoy this book? Definitely not. It's kind of structurally there, but it's not there. It's not constantly kind of significant. If you've heard of Helen of Troy or Cassandra or whatever, great, because you'll see a reference and you don't have to stop and think about it. If you know a bit of Shakespeare, that's going to be handy, when he talks about Elsinore, it's like, oh, right, Hamlet, fine, 4 Fathoms 5, Old, The Tempest. Yeah, great. But there was loads in this that went over my head, loads of stuff that I hadn't heard of, and it didn't stop me having a lot of pleasure in reading these 3 chapters. So I think, the message for me, I guess, is don't be put off if you think, oh, you're not going to get a load of the stuff. And what I would say is that you can go back and pick up those things if you want to. And so the approach that I've decided to take is that I will read and enjoy a couple of chapters at a time, and then go and sort of reread them, going back to the things that didn't make any sense to me, and looking up those that I want to, but not everything, because that would be a chore, as I said, and reading is not to be a chore. I'm going to illustrate this by reading you a little bit that I loved, and then but had a couple of bits in it that maybe went over my head, and then you'll see what I mean. So here we go. Stephen's on the beach. He's sitting on a rock. He's watching. There's a couple on the beach, and they're picking cockles, collecting cockles, and they've got a dog. Okay, and he's watching the dog. Their dog ambled about a bank of dwindling sand, trotting, sniffing on all sides, looking for something lost in a past life. Suddenly he made off like a bounding hare, ears flung back, chasing the shadow of a low skimming gull. The man's shrieked whistle struck his limp ears. He turned, bounded back, came nearer, trotted on twinkling shanks. On a field tenny, a buck trippened, proper, unattired. At the lace fringe of the tide, he halted with stiff forehoofs, seaward pointed ears, his snout lifted, barked at the wave noise, herds of sea morse. They serpented towards his feet, curling, unfurling many crests, every ninth breaking, clashing from farther out, waves and waves. Now, I hope, even with my not brilliant reading, you'll see that's just like, was lovely to read that paragraph. No problem reading it. Really got the dog, sniffing around, sniffing things as if it's looking for something from a past life. That idea that they look very sort of earnest and like it's serious when really they're just sniffing bits of seaweed. The waves, all of that. Yeah, lovely, got it. Lace fringed, rippling bubbles at the edge of the tide, big waves coming behind. But there's a couple of bits in there that it's like, oh, what the hell's he going on about at this point? So this bit about on a field tenny, a buck. So when I went back and thought, oh, I'll look up a few bits and get to grips with the bits that didn't make sense, I looked that up and found out, oh, right, he's gone off into heraldry at this point, and a buck is a stag, and field tenny is like sandy orangey background, and trippant means the stag is like on 3 legs with one 4 foot lifted up. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And oh yeah, get that for the dog. that made sense. And then you start to enjoy, oh, so we've had the dog, and then he's bounding like a hare, and then he's being like a deer, so there's like this kind of nice metamorphosis going on, so that's cool. Then there's the other weird word in there, sea morse, and as I was reading it, I was thinking sea morse, seahorse, yeah, that's nice, it's poetic, it works. Going back and looking it up, I thought, oh, well, I'll just find out what sea morse is. And it turns out it's like a really an archaic word for walrus. So then you get this sort of like, oh, right, waves like walruses, like big and grey and rounded and slightly threatening maybe. So another whole layer to enjoy. And I think that's the thing. There's always another layer to enjoy, but you don't have to go there unless you want to. You can just plough on and enjoy it. So as you can see, I'm really enthused by this. If you want to hear more, Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics is creating a playlist from people who were taking part in the read along. It's not too late to join us. At this point, most of us are only at the end of chapter 3. That's really not that far in. So if you fancy it, do. Meanwhile, I am going off with my one paw lifted and my seaward pointed ears, all eager to read chapters 4 and 5.